I found a hidden diary in my son's backpack. The code inside it explained everything. The email from my 10-year-old son Leo's school principal was a masterclass in polite administrative language, but the subtext screamed like a 5-alarm fire. We're concerned about Leo's recent behavioral shift. He was involved in an altercation with another student. Please call to schedule a meeting at your earliest convenience. An altercation. The word seemed to burn itself onto my retina. Leo. My gentle, bookish boy who once spent an entire afternoon constructing an elaborate leaf and twine hospital for an injured earthworm. The child who'd rather get lost in the intricate world-building of a fantasy novel or his own Minecraft creations than engage in any form of roughhousing. This wasn't just a shift. It felt like a complete and terrifying personality transplant, as if a stranger had stolen my son's face. The divorce from my ex-husband David had been final for 18 months. It was a slow, painful uncoupling, not born of explosive hatred but of a quiet, fundamental incompatibility that had, over years, curdled into a thick residue of resentment. We'd prided ourselves on our maturity, agreeing on a rigid 50-50 custody split, week on, week off, believing it was the most stable, fair arrangement for Leo. For the first year it worked surprisingly well. David and I were civil, even cooperative. We communicated solely through a sterile co-parenting app, attended school events together without visible tension, and Leo, while quieter, seemed to be adjusting as well as could be expected. Then 6 months ago David met Serena. Serena was everything I was not. A high-powered corporate lawyer, fiercely ambitious, impeccably dressed in sharp, minimalist clothing that never seemed to wrinkle. She spoke in a confident, measured tone and had strong, well-researched opinions on everything, especially parenting. Her vocabulary was filled with terms like rigorous enrichment, optimizing potential, and building resilience. Suddenly, the fragile, easygoing balance we'd achieved began to tilt precipitously. It started with small, pointed criticisms disguised as concerned suggestions. David would message me on the app. Serena noticed Leo's reading level isn't quite where it should be for his age. She's recommended this excellent tutor her friend uses. Or Leo mentioned you let him have screen time after 7 p.m. Serena's read all the latest studies on blue light and sleep disruption. We really need to be consistent across both households. I dismissed it, my maternal instincts bristling. I was Leo's mother. I knew my son. He was bright, incredibly creative, and emotionally intelligent. He didn't need optimizing. He needed to be loved and supported. But the changes in Leo during his weeks with his dad became more pronounced and deeply unsettling. He'd come back to my house quieter, more withdrawn, as if he'd been emotionally flattened. The dog-eared fantasy novels he loved were replaced with dry, age-inappropriate nonfiction books about young entrepreneurs and coding for kids. The messy, joyful, creative art projects that once cluttered our kitchen table stopped entirely. Serena says art is a nice hobby, but STEM is the future, he told me one day, parroting the phrase with a flat, robotic tone that chilled me to the bone. Then came the anger. It was a slow simmer at first, eye-rolling sighs when I asked about his day. A bedroom door slammed a little too hard when I suggested a board game. I desperately chalked it up to preteen hormones, a natural pulling away. But the school incident was something else entirely. He'd apparently shoved another boy, Jake Miller, into a locker hard enough to leave a bruise. All because Jake had made a joking comment about his worn-out sneakers. Sitting in the principal's office, watching Leo stare at his scuffed shoes, his small shoulders hunched in a posture of pure defiance and shame, I felt a profound, gut-wrenching sense of failure. Leo's grades have begun to slip across the board, Mrs. Davies said gently, her hands folded on her desk. His teachers say he's disengaged, lethargic, and often becomes argumentative over minor corrections. This outburst, it seems to be the culmination of several months of building frustration. We're very concerned. I don't understand, I said, my voice tight with a mixture of fear and defensiveness. This isn't him. This isn't my son. Leo refused to say a single word about it on the drive home. He just stared out the window, a miniature thundercloud of resentment. That night, as I was mechanically unpacking his backpack to wash his lunchbox, my fingers brushed against something hidden. Tucked deep into the hidden mesh pocket behind his textbooks was a small black moleskine notebook I'd never seen before. A sharp pang of guilt shot through me. I'd always fiercely respected his privacy. But the hollow look in his eyes in the principal's office, the terrifying stranger my son was becoming, it overrode my morals. With trembling hands I opened it. The first few pages were filled with a chaotic, angry scrawl that was barely recognizable as his handwriting. I hate this. Stupid. Why won't she listen? Then about a third of the way in, the text changed. It morphed into a bizarre alphanumeric code. It took me only a moment to crack it. Dis says M is lazy. That's why our house is messy. Dis says M lets me eat junk because she doesn't care about my long-term health. Dis says M's job is a dead end and that's why we can't afford the cool vacation Dad is planning. Dis asked if I'm sure I'm challenging myself enough at M's house. Said understimulation leads to low achievement and a mediocre life. DS. Dad Serena. A single unified entity. M. Mom. Me. My hands trembled so violently I nearly dropped the book. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger, a meticulous record of every slight, every criticism, every poisonous seed being systematically planted in my son's mind. They weren't direct attacks. They were subtle, insidious comparisons artfully designed to make my parenting, my home, my very life seem inadequate, chaotic, and neglectful. The code was his way of protecting these toxic thoughts, of hiding them even from himself. A secret language for a pain he couldn't otherwise express. But he had to record them. It was the only outlet he had for the cognitive dissonance tearing him apart. The final entry, dated the day of the fight, made my blood run cold. Jacob laughed at my shoes. Diaz said they were fine for M's house but not for the real world. He was right. I showed him. He wasn't angry at Jake. He was angry at me. For being the kind of mom who bought him wrong shoes. For not being Serena. The shame and rage they had filled him with had finally boiled over, and another boy had been collateral damage. I felt like I was going to be sick. This wasn't just bad-mouthing. This was a systematic psychological campaign to turn my son against me, to make him ashamed of the life he had with me. And David wasn't just allowing it. From the content of the diary, he was a willing participant. Confronting David was a disaster. I called him, the damning diary heavy in my lap. David, we need to talk. It's urgent. It's about Serena and the things she's saying to Leo. His sigh was long-suffering and audible through the phone. Claire, not this again. Leo's going through a phase. He's trying to find his place between two different worlds. Serena is just trying to help. She has high standards because she believes in him, that's all. She's telling him I'm lazy and that I don't care about his health. She's making him feel ashamed of his home, of me. I cried, my voice cracking. Claire, he said, his voice dripping with a patronizing calm that made me want to scream through the phone. I think you're being overly sensitive. Maybe you're projecting your own insecurities onto this situation. Serena would never say those things outright. Leo must have misunderstood her tone. She's very direct. Gaslighting. The oldest trick in the book. And he was doing it so smoothly, so convincingly, that for a fleeting second I almost doubted my own sanity. Almost. I knew then I was in a war and I was unarmed. I hired a lawyer, Maya, a shark in a designer pencil skirt who listened to my story and the contents of the diary without a hint of judgment. This is parental alienation, she stated bluntly. And it isn't always about blatant lies like your mom doesn't love you. Sometimes it's more about devaluation. Making one home seem less than to manipulate the child's loyalty and affections. It's insidious and notoriously hard to prove. This diary? It's a good start. But we need more. We need a pattern. My mission began. I started a journal of my own, a stark factual log. I noted every time Leo came home with a new critical phrase I knew wasn't his. Serena says a made bed is a made mind. Dad says real men don't watch cartoons, they read biographies. I recorded the details of every drop-off where David would make a backhanded comment about the state of my car or my overgrown garden, always just loudly enough for Leo to hear. I reached out to Leo's teachers, his soccer coach, his pediatrician. I calmly explained there was a concerning disparity between households and asked them to discreetly document any comments Leo made that compared his two homes or expressed negative views about his life with me. The soccer coach was incredibly helpful, mentioning that Leo had recently refused a post-game orange slice, saying, "Sugar is toxic. My stepmom says it's what lazy parents feed their kids." The pediatrician confirmed that while Leo was perfectly healthy and thriving, David had recently requested a full allergy panel and nutrient deficiency tests, citing specific concerns about dietary laxity at my home. The final, crushing piece of the puzzle came from an unlikely source: a parent-teacher conference. Leo's math teacher, Mr. Henderson, a kind, observant man in his 50s, pulled me aside after the main meeting. "Ms. Evans, can I speak with you for a moment? It's about Leo's science project on planetary orbits." My heart lifted slightly. At my house, we'd had a blast building a mobile of the solar system out of styrofoam balls, paint and fishing line. It was messy, creative and fun. Leo had loved it, carefully painting the rings of Saturn and the red spot on Jupiter. "He presented it in class last week," Mr. Henderson said carefully. "It was different from what he'd described working on." "Different how?" I asked, a knot of dread forming in my stomach. It was a perfectly typed 12-page report with printed graphs from NASA and a sophisticated PowerPoint presentation. There was no mobile. When I asked him about it, he looked down at his shoes and mumbled, "The mobile was artistically inaccurate. My dad and Serena helped me create a more fact-based professional presentation." He seemed almost embarrassed by the original. They hadn't just criticized my home. They had completely erased our shared, joyful project and replaced it with their own cold, superior version. They were systematically overwriting our experiences, our memories, our connection. We filed a motion for court-ordered family counseling and a modification of the custody agreement, alleging deliberate parental alienation. David and Serena fought back with the fury of the falsely accused. They hired a pit bull of a lawyer who immediately went on the offensive, painting me as a hysterical, jealous ex-wife who couldn't handle that my son had a new, strong female role model in his life. They argued I was inventing drama to punish David for moving on. The first court-ordered therapy session was a surreal circus. Serena dominated the conversation, speaking in fluent, condescending psychobabble about boundaries, structure, and age-appropriate expectations. David sat beside her, a silent, nodding accomplice, his hand on her knee. Leo, sandwiched between them on the couch, looked small and lost, saying nothing. The therapist, Dr. Reed, a woman with kind eyes, tried to engage him directly. "Leo, can you tell me how you feel when you're at your mom's house?" Leo shrugged, staring intently at his lap. "It's okay. Just okay." Dr. Reed pressed gently. "It's messy," Leo whispered, a perfect, heartbreaking echo of the criticism he'd recorded. Across from me, I saw Serena's lips curve into a small, satisfied smile. The battle was being fought, and in that moment I was losing. Leo was retreating further into himself, becoming more sullen and angry. The happy, creative boy was vanishing, replaced by a tense, anxious mini-adult who viewed everything and everyone through the critical lens Serena had given him. The breaking point came during my week with Leo. He'd been particularly hostile, snapping at every question, refusing to engage. Hoping to break through, I'd made his ultimate favorite meal, my grandmother's spaghetti and meatballs, filling the house with the familiar, comforting smell of garlic and tomatoes. He poked at it with his fork as if it were a science experiment. "Serena says processed carbs are the enemy after 5 p.m. They disrupt circadian rhythms. And red meat is inflammatory for your digestive system." I lost it. Not at him, but at the invisible, oppressive presence of Serena at my dinner table, in my food, in my son's head. "Leo, for God's sake, it's spaghetti. It's not poison. It's just food. It's just our food in our home. Can we please just have one meal without a commentary?" He flinched as if I'd struck him. The anger on his face melted into something else. Pure confusion and a deep, profound hurt. He pushed his chair back from the table, the legs screeching against the floor. "I hate it here," he said, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and tears. I want to go to Dad's. Their house makes sense. Everything here is just a mess. He ran to his room and slammed the door so hard a picture frame rattled on the wall. I sat alone at the table, surrounded by the uneaten, condemned food, and sobbed great heaving sobs of despair. I was becoming the angry, irrational parent they were telling him I was. I was playing right into their hands, proving every one of their twisted points. I called Maya, my voice raw. It's not working. He hates me. We're losing. I'm losing my son. Then we need a different approach, she said, her voice cool and steadying. We're playing defense. We need to go on the offensive. We need to go for the source. We need to depose Serena. The discovery process was brutal and invasive, but it was our turning point. We subpoenaed everything. Emails between David and Serena, their text messages, their shared digital calendar. What we unearthed was a treasure trove of calculated manipulation. In emails to her friends, Serena referred to my home as Camp Slacker, and my parenting style as benign neglect. She detailed her long-term strategy for bringing Leo up to standard. Most damningly, there was a recurring calendar alert set for the day before Leo switched to my house. Prep L for transition back to unstructured environment. Review rules screen time, nutrition, bedtime. Reinforce schedules. She was literally conducting a pre-departure briefing, prepping him to be critical of the life he was returning to. The single most damning piece of evidence was a text exchange between David and Serena the day after the disastrous therapy session. Serena, Dr. Reed is clearly not equipped to handle high-conflict cases. She's buying into Claire's victim narrative. David, I know. It's frustrating. What do we do? Serena, we stay the course. Leo's resistance is a sign it's working. He's internalizing our values. He's starting to see her chaos for what it is. He'll choose order and achievement every time. It's only a matter of time. He'll choose. Those two words laid their entire strategy bare. They were treating my son's love and sense of security like a competition to be won, and they were cheating without a shred of remorse. We took it all back to court. This time it wasn't my emotional word against their calm denials. It was their own words in cold, hard black and white. David looked pale and increasingly shaken as their emails were read aloud. Serena's meticulously crafted mask of concerned civility finally slipped, revealing the cold, calculating strategist beneath. She argued it was all taken out of context, that she only wanted the best for Leo. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman who had undoubtedly seen it all, was not amused. What I see here, she said, her voice icy with disapproval, is not a desire to do what is in the best interest of the child. It is a concerted campaign of parental devaluation and psychological manipulation. You have taken a bright, creative, and sensitive child and attempted to mold him into a reflection of your own rigid and elitist values, at the direct and conscious expense of his relationship with his mother. This court does not take kindly to a child's love being treated as a prize to be won through the denigration of the other parent. She granted our motion in full. She suspended the 50-50 custody arrangement immediately. Primary physical custody was awarded to me. David's visitation was reduced to every other weekend and one supervised dinner a week, contingent upon him and Serena both attending and completing a specialized co-parenting counseling program focused on alienation. Most importantly, all communication was to go through a monitored parenting app. Serena was to have no say in parenting decisions whatsoever and was legally barred from attending drop-offs, pickups, or school events. The fallout was immediate and intense. David was furious and humiliated, blaming me for dragging our private lives through the mud. Serena, I heard through the grapevine, was apoplectic, blaming David's weakness and failure to control his ex-wife for their loss. The first few weeks with Leo under the new arrangement were quiet and terribly tense. The constant criticism had stopped, but the damage was deep and pervasive. The connection between us felt severed, a bridge bombed from both sides. He was polite, distant, and just went through the motions of living in my house, a ghost of his former self. The healing began in the smallest, most unexpected ways. I consciously stopped trying to compete. I stopped trying to be a Serena version of a mom, hyper-organized, rigidly scheduled, and relentlessly enriching. I went back to being just me. I left my bed unmade sometimes. We had cereal for dinner while watching an animated movie. We built an enormous, ridiculous blanket fort that took up the entire living room and left it up for 3 glorious days. At first, Leo watched me warily, waiting for the catch, waiting for me to suddenly enforce the rules of order and achievement he'd been taught to expect. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tension began to leave his shoulders. The constant, critical look in his eyes began to soften. The true breakthrough happened on a rainy Saturday. I was trying to fix a leaky faucet with various tools, washers, and pipes spread across the kitchen floor, muttering creative curses under my breath. Leo watched from the doorway for a long time, observing the chaotic scene. "Serena would just call a plumber," he stated flatly. But his tone wasn't critical this time. It was merely observational, a statement of fact. "I know," I grunted, wrestling fruitlessly with a wrench. "But I like knowing how things work. Even if I'm spectacularly bad at actually fixing them." He was silent for a full minute, just watching my clumsy struggle. Then he said quietly, "Can I try?" We spent the next 2 hours on the floor together, getting covered in water and laughing at our own incompetence as the leak only seemed to get worse. We never did get it right. We finally admitted defeat, turned off the water under the sink and called a real plumber for the next day. But as we sat there in the glorious mess, surrounded by tools and soaked towels, laughing until our sides hurt, I saw him. I saw my son. The real Leo, buried under months of criticism and impossible expectation, emerged just for a moment. He wasn't thinking about optimized potential or inflammatory foods. He was just a kid sitting in a small puddle with his mom, failing spectacularly at something and finding it absolutely hilarious. It wasn't a magic cure. There are still days when the shadow of Serena's voice echoes in his head. He still sometimes looks at my messy car or my simple, thrown-together meals with a fleeting hint of his old judgment. The court order is temporary. David has already filed for a review, hoping the dust will have settled in his favor. But now we have a code of our own. It's our secret weapon. When I see him starting to get tense, when I see the critical look start to form in his eyes, I'll catch his gaze and say, completely deadpan, "Processed carbs are the enemy." And he'll give a small, sheepish, almost smile, a silent acknowledgement of the absurdity we survived. It's our reminder that the critical voices in his head telling him his home isn't good enough were never his own. They were implants. And slowly, day by day, joke by joke, and failed repair job by failed repair job, we're finding them and deleting them for good.